friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
We will further distract them with amusements, games, pastimes, passions, luxury, homes. Via the media, we shall soon begin to propose competitions in art and in sport of all kinds. These interests will finally distract their minds from asking questions which would definitely not want them to answer. Growing more and more accustomed to reflect and form any opinions of their own, people will begin to talk in the same manner as we do because we alone shall be offering them new directions for thought. Of course, we will do this through persons who will not be suspected of working alongside us. The part played by the libertarians and utopian dreamers will be finally come to an end when our government is acknowledged. Up until that time, they will continue to do us good service. And therefore, we shall continue to direct their minds to all sorts of vain conceptions of fantastic theories that are new and apparently progressive. For we have completely and successfully attracted the brainless minds of the Goyim with the pursuit of progress, to the point where there is not one Goyim mind able to perceive that under this word lies a departure from truth in all cases. With the exception of material inventions, progress is an illusory idea which serves to obscure truth. Nobody knows this truth except us, the chosen of God, and we are its guardians. When we finally come into our kingdom, our orators will talk about the great problems which had turned humanity upside down, and how these problems were brought an end under our beneficent rule. Who will ever suspect then that all these peoples were stage managed by us according to a political plan which no one has so much as guessed at in the course of many centuries? Protocol 13 of the Learned Elders of Zion. That's passages 3 through 6. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio. And as always, I'm greatly honored to be here with you in fellowship. And I thank all of you for taking the time to join us in live broadcast. Tonight, I will be covering what will be the third in the series of the 10 King prophecy. And I'm hoping to move on from the transition of power from Nimrod to Esau and from the bloodline of the serpent back to that of Adam's. And we're going to be continuing story with Jacob, Joseph, and Ruel, who is Jethro, the father-in-law of Moshe, or Moses, as most people call him. And I'm going to be elaborating further in the story of the garments of power and the rod of wonder, and how the emphasis on the garments become replaced with that of the rod of God, or the staff of authorities. And by the time we get to Moses or Moshe, we'll see that the dominating theme of these particular items, these objects, they transition. And even though historically, in the legendary accounts of these particular items and their journey together, beginning with the banishment of Adam from paradise, they do take a diverging path when Ham steals them, pilfers them from Noah's ark. And for a short time, they are separated in ownership and possession as well as in influence. And they are not restored together as a tandem until the time of Joseph. And I will be sharing more elaboration on that count when we go into those particular passages. But I do want to share with you, we were ending last last week. I was ending with the story of Nimrod's power and how Esau came to be in possession of the garments of power, which, being stolen by Ham, they were passed on to the bloodline of what was Cush, and then that of Nimrod. And so these items then were restored. And so we see again the back and forth, as I spoke in the prophecy of the 10 kings, that Nimrod was the first world ruler. And from the line of the serpent, following Adam, and that they then are restored, and the next ruler would be Joseph, I believe, in the timeline of the 10 Kings prophecy. But let me actually confirm that. I don't want to tell you wrong. And so let me pull that up here. Okay. Okay. The kings, yes, Joseph is listed as third. The fourth, Solomon. The fifth, Ahab. The sixth, Nebuchadnezzar. then Cyrus, then Alexander the Great, and then we have the Messiah, and then the Father, Yahuwah, as the first and the last, the Alpha, the Omega, the Aleph Tav. And so, and we know that there's a lot of other personalities that come to play within the dominant timeline of these particular kings. For instance, Pharaoh, after the time of Joseph, that there was a king named Mecron who was in power while Joseph was appointed viceroy, vizier, or vice regent under him. And then when his son Melol, Melol, came to power, then the Israelites were beginning to be oppressed. And then it continued to get progressively worse until the time of Moshe. And it's believed that Ramses II was the Pharaoh, was the king of Egypt during that time, which was 430 years later from Abraham. And we know that the prophecy given to Ezekiel was that there would be, the oppression for the children of Abraham for the 430 years. All right. And what I want to cover now before we go into the other aspect of what I want to talk about is just the distinction again, to elaborate just a little bit further on the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, which begun in Genesis chapter 3:15, was prophecy of the war that would take place beginning with Cain and Abel, which we know Cain murdered his half-brother Abel, and that Abel would be replaced by Sheth. And we have that in that particular scenario, what is called the heteropaternal superfecundation, which is a medical term for the twins, fraternal twins, having different fathers, that they share a common mother and are born of the same womb and at the same time. But they have different fathers, could have different characteristics, different colors of skin, even. Just be completely different. And then we have in the scenario of Abraham with regard to Ishmael and Isaac, that they share the same fathers, but yet have different mothers. Hagar being the Egyptian princess that was given to Sarah to be her handmaiden, that it would be her that Ishmael is born. And there's another interesting story which I'll share with you this evening that begins with the well that the Most High establishes for Hagar and Ishmael to nourish them when they are stranded in the desert, and Ishmael as a baby is crying. and is about to succumb to death. And so God shows her where to go for this water, and that this particular well becomes a place of, a refuge, a sanctuary in the middle of the desert, and provides nourishment for a lot of animals in helping them to survive, track over that particular portion of land. And there's another interesting story which not a lot of people know about, but it has to do with three of the very star-crossed couples of scripture that are dominant in the histories of the patriarchs. And that has to do with Abraham, his servant Eliezer, who was sent by him to find a wife for his son Isaac, who was the seed of promise. And we see that the birthright, as it skipped over Cain, so did it skip over Ishmael. And God told Abraham that Isaac would be his seed of promise and the one whom the covenant would be held. And we see that this theme is also replicated in the story of Jacob and Esau, whereas Jacob and Esau were children born from the same father and the same mother. They were twins. And yet, Rebekah, the wife of Isaac, who was discovered and brought back by Eliezer to be his wife, she was told that there would be within her womb two nations at war with one another, two peoples contending against each other, and that the younger would supplant the older, which is what Jacob even means. His name means the supplanter. And this is prophecy again that was given to Rebekah before her children were born. And so, unusually you have this scenario of the elder losing their birthright and it being skipping them is passed on to the younger. Cain and Abel, but we know that passed on to Seth because Abel was murdered. And then you have Ishmael and Isaac, and then Jacob and Esau. Well, what is interesting again about this well where God establishes the water hole for Hagar and Ishmael is that when Jacob leaves and is fleeing from his brother Esau, he's given instructions to go. His mother Rebecca, who is also a prophetess, she tells him to go to live with her brother-in-law Laban, and she says there that he will find and meet his wife, and that does indeed occur. And what is interesting is that Jacob, in leaving his father's land and then traveling to, when he comes to this particular well, it is in that exact spot where Eliezer finds Rebecca, that Jacob lays eyes upon and falls in love with Rachel. And then what is interesting as well, and the story will be covered in this book as well as I don't know if I'll read you the account of it, but I'm just telling you the story of it now because not a lot of people know about it. But Moshe, when he runs from Pharaoh and leaves eastward into the land of Midian, he encounters Zipporah, who would later be his wife. And she would actually save the life of this prophet twice. And so she was very formidable in the way that the story of how Moshe survived to be a leader and a type and a shadow of Messiah, that they encountered there at the same well. And so you have over the course of 400 plus years, three different sets of star-crossed lovers meeting and being instrumental in their coupling with establishing the Israelites as not only a chosen people, but also as a nation of prophets and kings. Because it would be through them specifically that Messiah would be born, the stem of Jesse, which I'll go into as well at some point, because that is also another aspect of the story that we're going to be getting into. Um, but I want to, before we do that, I just want to elaborate a little bit upon the differentiation with regard to Ishmael and Isaac, because we know that Ishmael, that the Arab nations are linked to him. And then with Jacob and Esau, I don't know how many of you realize this, but Esau, who is Edom, that Edom in its modern personification is Rome and also the Roman Catholic Church. And that the rule of Caesar, as well as the rule of the popes, that they are considered to be the rule of Esau, and that he would live by the sword. And one other thing with regard to Edom and Rome is that if you examine the story of their founding, that it was said that two children of the king at that time that had uh, his kingship rent from him, that their parents were hunted, killed, and these two twins, Romulus and Remus, that they were raised by a she-wolf. And then they, in their lifetime, assisted their grandfather in establishing his kingship once more, and then building cities. Romulus killed Remus, Romulus and Remus. And it's a, in my opinion, it's a connection to the story of Cain and Abel, who were also twins, and the one killed the other. And the Roman people, the story of Romulus and Remus is emphasized because it shows that even blood, that the state and the citizens and the people that are part of Rome and the might and the grandeur of Rome, that even blood, that your duty unto the state and to the empire is more important than blood relation and family. And so, I mean, that is how Rome has dominated. Because you look at all the wars between the Caesars and the emperors and the bloodlines and even the popes, Borgias, um, who had three popes of his bloodline. I mean, they raped and killed and murdered each other to just hold the crown of rulership, even if it was for single day. And so what I'm going to read here will give you a little bit of insight into that and, again, help you to understand that even what we are contending with in this day and age, because the Roman Empire is now a 10 kingdom conglomeration, the clay mixed with iron, the 10 toes. It would be those empires which would rule and come to rise in power even at the end of days, as spoken of by Daniel in his vision of the empires that would rule from his time, which he was a servant unto Nebuchadnezzar. And then we know that Cyrus and Darius came about as the Persian kings that overthrew his empire. But they, again, they represent Edom, and Edom is Esau. And so we'll begin with this. This is a verse out of the Legends of the Jews. Though Abraham reached a good old age beyond the limit of years vouchsafed later generations, he yet died 5 years before his allotted time. The intention was to let him live to be 180 years old, the same age as Isaac's at his death. But on account of Esau, God brought his life to an abrupt close. For some time, Esau had been pursuing his evil inclinations in secret. And finally, he dropped his mask, and on the day of Abraham's death, he was guilty of 5 crimes. He ravished a betrothed maiden, committed murder, doubted the resurrection of the dead, scorned the birthright, and denied God. And then the Lord said, I promised Abraham that he should go to his fathers in peace. Can I now permit him to be a witness of his grandson's rebellion against God, his violation of the laws of chastity, and his shedding of blood? It is better for him to die now and in peace. The men slain by Esau on this day were Nimrod and two of his adjutants. A long-standing feud had existed between Esau and Nimrod because the mighty hunter before the Lord was jealous of Esau, who devoted himself assiduously to the chaos. Once when he was hunting, it happened that Nimrod was separated from his people. Only two men were with him. Esau, who lay in ambush, noticed his isolation and waited until he should pass his cover. Then he threw himself upon Nimrod suddenly and felled him and his two companions, who hastened to his succor. The outcries of the latter brought the attention or the attendants of Nimrod to the spot where they lay dead, but not before Esau had stripped him of his garments and fled to the city without them. And these garments of Nimrod had an extraordinary effect upon cattle, beasts, and birds. Of their own accord, they would come and prostrate themselves before him who was arrayed in them. And thus Nimrod and Esau after him were able to rule over men and beasts. After slaying Nimrod, Esau hastened cityward in great fear of his victims' followers, and tired and exhausted. He arrived home to find Jacob busy preparing a dish of lentils. Numerous male and female slaves were in Isaac's household. Nevertheless, Jacob was so simple and modest in his demeanor that if he came home late from Bet Ha Midrash, he would disturb none to prepare his meal, but would do it himself. And on this occasion he was cooking lentils for his father to serve him as his mourner's meal after the death of Abraham. Okay, this is where I had stopped last time. I was talking about the argument that Esau and Jacob had gotten into, which led to him selling his birthright. And then after this, it will go into, again, the differentiation of the two bloodlines and how Jacob and Esau, even though they are twins born of the same father and the same mother, Esau is considered the seed of the serpent. And Jacob, which we find that Jacob is favored and Esau hated. And this is the reason why. All right. Esau accosted Jacob thus: "Why art thou preparing lentils, Jacob? Because our grandfather passed away. They shall be a sign of my grief and mourning, that he may love me in the days to come." And remember, this is on Passover. Esau, thou fool, dost thou really think it possible that man should come to life again after he has been dead and has moldered in the grave? He continued to taunt Jacob. Why dost thou give thyself so much trouble? He said, lift up thine eyes, and thou wilt see that all men eat whatever comes to hand. Fish, creeping and crawling creatures, swine's flesh, and all sorts of things like these, and thou vexest thyself about a dish of lentils? Jacob, if we act like other men, what shall we do on the day of the Lord, the day on which the pious will receive their reward, when a herald will proclaim, where is he that weigheth the deeds of men? Where is he that counteth? Is there a future world? Esau asked. Or will the dead be called back to life? If it were so, why hath not Adam returned? Hast thou heard that Noah, through whom the world was raised anew, hath reappeared? Yea, Abraham, the friend of God, more beloved of him than any man, hath come to life again? Question mark. Jacob, if thou art of opinion that there is no future world, and that the dead do not rise to new life, then why dost thou want thy birthright? Sell it to me. Now, while it is just possible to do so, once the Torah is revealed, it cannot be done. Verily, there is a future world in which the righteous receive their reward. I tell thee this, lest thou say later that I deceived thee. Jacob was little concerned about the double share of the inheritance that went with the birthright. What he thought of was the priestly service, which was the prerogative of the firstborn in ancient times. And Jacob was loath to have his impious brother Esau play the priest. He who despised all divine service. The scorn manifested by Esau for the resurrection of the dead, he felt also for the promise of God to give the Holy Land to the seed of Abraham. He did not believe in it, and therefore he was willing to cede his birthright and the blessing attached thereto in exchange for a mess of pottage. In addition, Jacob paid him in coin, and besides, he gave him what was more than money, the wonderful sword of Methuselah, which Isaac had inherited from Abraham and bestowed upon Jacob. Esau made game of Jacob. He invited his associates to feast at his brother's table, saying, Know ye what I did to this Jacob? I ate his lentils, drank his wine, amused myself at expense, and sold my birthright to him. But the Lord said, Thou despisest the birthright. Therefore I shall make thee despised in all generations. And by way of punishment for denying God and the resurrection of the dead, the descendants of Esau were cut off from the world. As naught was holy to Esau, Jacob bade him swear concerning the birthright by the life of their father, for he knew Esau love for Isaac, that it was strong, nor did he fail to have a document made out, duly signed by witnesses, setting forth that Esau had sold him the birthright, together with his claim upon a place in the cave of Machpelah. And though no blame can attach to Jacob for all this, yet he secured the birthright from him by cunning, and therefore the descendants of Jacob had to serve the descendants of Esau. All right, this next portion, the favorite of Abraham, speaks to the distinction between these two people groups, as well as Jacob and Esau. Isaac was the counterpart of his father. In body and soul, he resembled him in every particular, in beauty, wisdom, strength, wealth, and noble deeds. He was therefore as great an honor for Isaac to be called the son of his father as for Abraham to be called the father of his son. And though Abraham was the progenitor of 30 nations, he is always designated as the father of Isaac. And despite his many excellent qualities, Isaac married late in life. God permitted him to meet the wife suitable to him only after he had successfully disproved the mocking charges of Ishmael, who was in the habit of taunting him with having been circumcised at the early age of 8 days, while Ishmael had submitted himself voluntarily to the operation when he was 13 years old. And for this reason, God demanded Isaac as a sacrifice when he had attained to full manhood at the age of 37, and Isaac was ready to give up his life. Ishmael's jibes were thus robbed of their sting, and Isaac was permitted to marry. But another delay occurred before his marriage could take place. Directly after the sacrifice on Mount Moriah, his mother died, and he mourned her for 3 years. And finally, he married Rebekah, who was then a maiden of 14. Rebekah was a rose between thorns. Her father was the Aramean Bethuel, and her brother was Laban, but she did not walk in their ways. Her piety was equal to Isaac's. Nevertheless, their marriage was not entirely happy, for they lived together no less than 20 years without begetting children. Rebekah besought her husband to entreat God for the gift of children, as his father Abraham had done. At first, Isaac would not do her bidding. God had promised Abraham a numerous progeny, and he thought their childlessness was probably Rebekah's fault. And it was her duty to supplicate God and not his. But Rebekah would not desist, and husband and wife repaired to Mount Moriah together to pray to God there. And Isaac said, O Lord God of heaven and earth, whose goodness and mercies fill the earth, thou who didst take my father from his father's house and brought from his birthplace, and didst bring him unto this land, and didst say unto him, to thee and thy seed will I give the land, and didst promise him and declare unto him, I will multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven and as the sand of the sea. Now may thy words be verified, which thou didst speak unto thy father. For thou art the Lord our God, and our eyes are toward thee to give us seed of men as thou didst promise us, for thou art the Lord our God, and our eyes are upon thee. Isaac prayed furthermore that all children destined for him might be born unto him from this pious wife of his. And Rebekah made the same petition regarding her husband Isaac and the children destined for her. Their united prayer was heard, and yet it was chiefly for the sake of Isaac that God gave them children. It is true, Rebekah's piety equaled her husband's, but the prayer of a pious man, who is the son of a pious man, is far more efficacious than the prayer of one who, though pious himself, is descended from a godless father. The prayer wrought a great miracle, for Isaac's physique was such that he could not have been expected to beget children. And equally, it was not in the course of nature that Rebekah should bear children. When Rebekah had been pregnant 7 months, she began to wish that the curse of childlessness had not been removed from her. She suffered torturous pain because her twin sons began their lifelong quarrels in her womb. They strove to kill each other. If Rebekah walked in the vicinity of a temple erected to idols, Esau moved in her body. And if she passed a synagogue or a Bet HaMidrash, Jacob essayed to break forth from her womb. The quarrels of the children turned upon such differences as these. Esau would insist that there was no life except the earthly life of material pleasures, and Jacob would reply, "My brother, there are two worlds before us, this world and the world to come. In this world men eat and drink and traffic and marry and bring up sons and daughters, but all this does not take place in the world to come. If it please thee, do thou take this world, and I will take the other." Esau had Samael as his ally, which we know that Samael, the angel of death, the viper of God, the serpent which beguiled Eve, this is the same one that worked through the children of Cain. And here it says that Esau had Samael as his ally, who desired to slay Jacob in his mother's womb. But the archangel Michael hastened to Jacob's aid. He tried to burn Samael, and the Lord saw it was necessary to constitute a heavenly court for the purpose of arbitrating the case of Michael and Samael. Even the quarrel between the two brothers regarding the birthright had its beginning before they emerged from the womb of their mother. Each desired to be the first to come into the world. It was only when Esau threatened to carry his point at the expense of his mother's life that Jacob gave sway. Rebekah asked other women whether they too had suffered such pain during their pregnancy, and when they told her that they had not heard of a case like hers except the pregnancy of Nimrod's mother, she betook herself to Mount Moriah, whereon Shem and Eber had their Bet HaMidrash. She requested them, as well as Abraham, to inquire of God what the cause of her dire suffering was. And Shem replied, "My daughter, I confide a secret to thee. See to it that none finds out." And here's the prophecy. "Two nations are in thy womb, and how should thy body contain them? Seeing that the whole world will not be large enough for them to exist in it together peaceably. Two nations they are, each owning a world of its own, the one of the Torah, the other sin. From the one will spring Solomon, the builder of the temple, from the other Vespasian, the destroyer thereof. These two are what are needed to raise the number of nations to 70. They will never be in the same estate. Esau will vaunt lords, while Jacob will bring forth prophets. And if Esau has princes, Jacob will have all the world. One will exceed the other in strength. First, Esau will subjugate the whole world, but in the end, Jacob will rule over all. The older of the two will serve the younger, provided this one is pure of heart, and otherwise the younger will be enslaved by the older. The circumstances connected with the birth of her having twin sons were as remarkable as those during the period of Rebekah's pregnancy. Esau was the first to see the light, and with him all impurity came from the womb. Jacob was born clean and sweet of body. Esau was brought forth with hair, beard, and teeth, both front and back, and he was blood red. Now, this is interesting because here it makes mention of teeth, both front and back. What is interesting about that is that the Nephilim giants were said to have two sets of teeth in the front and the back. And so it makes you wonder, was Esau a Nephilim giant in some manner? Something to consider. All right, continuing. And he was blood red, a sign of his future sanguinary nature. On account of his ruddy appearance, he remained uncircumcised. Isaac, his father, feared that it was due to poor circulation of the blood, and he hesitated to perform the circumcision. He decided to wait until Esau should attain his 13th year, the age at which Ishmael had received the sign of the covenant. But when Esau grew up, he refused to give heed to his father's wish, and so he was left uncircumcised, the opposite of his brother in this as in all respects. Jacob was born with the sign of the covenant upon his body, a rare distinction, but Esau also bore a mark upon him at birth, the figure of a serpent, the symbol of all that is wicked and hated of God. I think I'll have to stop there. We're almost to break. Yeah, we'll just stop there. I'll pick up the story on the other side. And then we'll go into the passing of rulership, kingship to Jacob and then to Joseph, and then how these items being procured by Jethro, who's also called Ruel. And we know him to be the father-in-law of Moshe, that these items came to be in possession of Moses, and that their use by him is what liberated the Israelites from the bondage of Egypt, and that the celebration of Passover in previous generations and peoples, that it was fulfilled in completion with the account of the Exodus. All right, we'll be right back.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity, but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures. Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses?
Which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible.
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
Sacred Word Revealed comes to Atlanta, Georgia on March 27th through 29th, 2020. Purposed to reveal end times mysteries, to prepare the final generation, we must don the full armor of God. Featuring Zen Garcia, Gary Wayne, Stephen and Yana Ben Noon, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, Justin James Garcia, Dr. Joy Pugh, Rob Skiba, Laurel Austin, buy your tickets now at sacredwordrevealed.com.
everybody, for second hour. I am your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revelation Radio. This next portion will cover how it is that the contract, the birthright being sold between Esau and Jacob, came to play in the burial of Jacob, as well as what ended up being the death of Esau at the hand of Cushim, who was the son of Dan. And so I'll read this story and then we'll move in to how Joseph came to be the possessor of the garments of power and the rod of wonder. And the report reached Esau, saying, Jacob died in Egypt, and his sons and all Egypt are conveying him to the land of Canaan to bury him. And Esau heard this thing, and he was dwelling in Mount Seir. And he rose up with his sons and all his people and all his household, a people exceedingly great. And they came to mourn and weep over Jacob. And it came to pass when Esau came, he mourned for his brother Jacob, and all Egypt and all Canaan again rose up and mourned a great mourning with Esau over Jacob in that place. And Joseph and his brethren brought their father Jacob from that place, and they went to Hebron to bury Jacob in the cave by his fathers. And they came unto Kiriath Arba, to the cave. And as they came, Esau stood with his sons against Joseph and all his brethren as a hindrance in the cave, saying, Jacob shall not be buried therein, for it belongeth to us and to our father. And Joseph and his brethren heard the words of Esau's sons, and they were exceedingly wroth. And Joseph approached unto Esau, saying, What is this thing which they have spoken? Surely my father Jacob bought it from thee for great riches after the death of Isaac, now 25 years ago. And also all the land of Canaan he bought from thee and from thy sons, and thy seed after thee. And Jacob bought it for his sons and his seed after him, for an inheritance forever. And why speakest thou these things this day? And Esau answered, saying, Thou speakest falsely and utterest lies, for I sold not anything belonging to me in all this land. As thou sayest, neither did my brother Jacob buy aught belonging to me in this land. And Esau spoke these things in order to deceive Joseph with his words, for Esau knew that Joseph was not present in those days when Esau saw all belonging to him in the land of Canaan to Jacob. And Joseph said unto Esau, Surely my father inserted these things with thee in the record of purchase, and testified the record with witnesses, and behold, it is with us in Egypt. And Esau answered, saying unto him, Bring the record, all that thou wilt find in the record, so will we do. And Joseph called unto Naphtali, his brother, and he said, Hasten quickly, stray not, and run, I pray thee, to Egypt, and bring all the records, the record of the purchase, the sealed record, and the open record, and also the first records in which all the transactions of the birthright are written. Fetch thou, and thou shalt bring them unto us hither, that we may know from them all the words of Esau and his sons, which they spoke this day. And Naphtali hearkened to the voice of Joseph, and he hastened and ran to go down to Egypt. And Naphtali was lighter on foot than any of the stags that were upon the wilderness, for he would go upon ears of corn without crushing them. And when Esau saw that Naphtali had gone to fetch the records, he and his sons increased their resistance against the cave. And Esau and all his people rose up against Joseph and his brethren to battle. And all the sons of Jacob and the people of Egypt fought with Esau and his men. And the sons of Esau and his people were smitten before the sons of Jacob. And the sons of Jacob slew of Esau's people 40 men. And Chushim, the son of Dan, the son of Jacob, was at that time with Jacob's sons. But he was about 100 cubits distant from the place of battle, for he remained with the children of Jacob's sons by Jacob's byre to guard it. And Chushim was dumb and deaf, still he understood the voice of consternation among men. And he asked, saying, Why do you not bury the dead? And what is this great consternation? And they answered him the words of Esau and his sons. And he ran to Esau in the midst of the battle, and he slew Esau with a sword, and he cut off his head, and it sprang to a distance, and Esau fell amongst the people of the battle. And when Chushim did this thing, the sons of Jacob prevailed over the sons of Esau, and the sons of Jacob buried their father Jacob by force in the cave. And the sons of Esau beheld it. And Jacob was buried in Hebron in the cave of Machpelah, which Abraham had bought from the sons of Heth for the possession of a burial place. And he was buried in very costly garments. And no king had such honor paid him as Joseph paid unto his father at his death. For he buried him with great honor, like unto the burial of kings. And Joseph and his brethren made a mourning of 7 days for their father. That's the book of Jasher, chapter 56, verses 46 through 68. And so we see that indeed the birthright was written down in contract, and it was no simple promise. A voiced, I'll give you my birthright, you give me this thing of lentils. No, it was something that was very serious and that took some time to be witnessed and testified to. And so the birthright was a very big deal. And as it is accounted in these stories. All right. We will the evasion of Esau from Nimrod's king's guard. I had told you about how because he had killed Nimrod and also 2 of his king's guard, that he was near death himself when he ran back to his father's house and found Jacob there cooking lentils for his father because of Abraham's passing. And as I said, this all occurred on Passover. And so because Esau did not believe in the afterlife, nor did he care about the land of Canaan, nor the cave of Machpelah, for that reason, he was willing to give up his birthright. And he did so for money, for coin, because, all he cared about was riches and wealth. And even then, the legacy of the covenant, the birthright, all that didn't matter nothing to him. And so he sold his portion. But I'll revisit the story from one other perspective on Esau and Nimrod, just to bring this up once more. And Esau at that time, after the death of Abraham, frequently went in the field to hunt. And Nimrod, king of Babel, the same was Amphrahel, also frequently went with his mighty men to hunt in the field and to walk about with his men in the cool of the day. And Nimrod was observing Esau all the days, for jealousy was formed in the heart of Nimrod against Esau all the days. And on a certain day Esau went in the field to hunt, and he found Nimrod walking in the wilderness with his 2 men. And his mighty men and his people were with him in the wilderness, but they removed at a distance from him, and they went from him in different directions to hunt. And Esau concealed himself for Nimrod, and he lurked for him in the wilderness. And Nimrod and his men that were with him did not know him, and Nimrod and his men frequently walked about in the field at the cool of the day, and to know where his men were hunting in the field. And Nimrod and 2 of his men that were with him came to the place where they were, when Esau started suddenly from his lurking place and drew his sword and hastened and ran to Nimrod and cut off his head. And Esau fought a desperate fight with the 2 men that were with Nimrod. And when they called out to him, Esau turned to them and smote them to death with his sword. And all the mighty men of Nimrod who had left him to go to the wilderness heard the cry at a distance, and they knew the voices of those 2 men. And they ran to know the cause of it. When they found their king and the 2 men that were with him lying dead in the wilderness. And when Esau saw the mighty men of Nimrod coming at a distance, he fled and thereby escaped. And Esau took the valuable garments of Nimrod, which Nimrod's father had bequeathed to Nimrod, and with which Nimrod prevailed over the whole land. And he ran and concealed them in his house. And Esau took those garments and ran into the city on account of Nimrod's men. And he came unto his father's house wearied and exhausted from fight. And he was ready to die through grief when he approached his brother Jacob and sat before him. And he said unto his brother Jacob, Behold, I shall die this day, and wherefore then do I want the birthright? And Jacob acted wisely with Esau in this matter. And Esau sold his birthright to Jacob, for it was so brought about by the Lord. And Esau's portion in the cave of the field of Machpelah, which Abraham had bought from the children of Heth, for the possession of a burial ground. Esau also sold to Jacob, and Jacob bought all this from his brother Esau for value given. And Jacob wrote the whole of this in a book, and he testified the same with witnesses, and he sealed it, and the book remained in the hands of Jacob. And when Nimrod, the son of Cush, died, his men lifted him up and brought him in consternation and buried him in his city. And all the days that Nimrod lived were 215 years, and he died. And the days that Nimrod reigned upon the people of the land were 185 years. And Nimrod died by the sword of Esau in shame and contempt. And the seed of Abraham caused his death, as he had seen in his dream. And at the death of Nimrod, his kingdom became divided into many divisions, and all those parts that Nimrod reigned over was restored to the respective kings of the land, who recovered them after the death of Nimrod. And all the people of the house of Nimrod were for a long time enslaved to all the other kings of the land. The book of Jasher, chapter 27, verses 1 through 17. And so you see, again, there is multiple confirmations as to Esau taking these garments back from Nimrod and hiding them. And then because he thought he was going to die anyways from Nimrod's bodyguards, hunting him, he sold his birthright to Jacob. Now, there's not very many stories that speak of how Jacob came to be in possession of these items once Esau. Once Esau ended up parting with them, and how he parted with them. And the story goes that because it was Passover and Abraham had asked the boys to go out and to bring forth food so that he could provide a blessing to them, that Rebekah didn't improvise and quickly provided food for Jacob. And Esau went out, and because he could not find venison, he killed some dogs, and he was going to feed this, what was considered to be unclean meat. He was going to give it to Abraham anyways. And his mother realized this, and so she was vigilant and watching for the return of Esau, because she had helped Jacob to dress like him and to pass and to receive the blessing. And there is one passage that's in the Targum, Genesis chapter 27, verse 15, that speaks of how Rebekah knew where these items were and gave them to her younger son in taking them from Esau. It says this. And Rebekah took the pleasant vestments of Esau, her elder son, which had formerly been Adam's, but which that day Esau had not worn, but they remained with her in the house. And with them she dressed Jacob, her younger son. And so that's how they came to be in Jacob's possession. And then from there, we know they were passed on to Joseph. And we see that this is spoken about in the testimony that Joseph gives while he's on his deathbed, that he speaks about to all of the 12 tribes, the patriarchs of the 12 tribes that are born unto him. He speaks prophecy over them, and then also shares the blessings of how their relationship to the word of the Lord becomes established. And so, let's share this. And Israel said to Joseph, Behold, my end cometh to die. But the word of the Lord shall be your helper, and restore you to the land of your fathers. And I, behold, I have given to thee the city of Shechem, one portion for a gift above thy brethren, which I took from the hand of the Amorite, as at the time that you went into the midst of it. And I arose and helped you with my sword and with my bow. The Jerusalem Targum. And I, behold, I have given thee one portion above thy brethren, the robe of the first Adam. Abraham, the father of my father, took it from the hands of Nimrod the wicked, and gave it to Isaac my father. And Isaac my father gave it to Esau, and I took it from the hands of Esau my brother, not with my sword nor with my bow, but through my righteousness and my good works. And Jacob called his sons and said to them, Purify yourselves from uncleanness, and I will show you the hidden mysteries, the ends concealed, the recompense of reward from the righteous. The retribution of the wicked and the bower of Eden, what it is, and the 12 tribes of Israel gathered themselves together around the golden bed whereon he reclined, and where was revealed to him the Shekinah of the Lord. Though the end for which the king Messiah is to come had been concealed from him, then said he, Come, and I will declare to you what shall befall you at the end of days. Gather yourselves together, and hear, ye sons of Jacob, and receive instruction from Israel, your father, in the Jerusalem. And our father Jacob called his sons and said to them, Gather together, and I will teach you the concealed end, the secret mysteries, the recompense of reward for the just, and the punishment of the wicked, and the blessedness of Eden, what it is. And the 12 tribes of Jacob assembled and surrounded the golden bed whereon our father Jacob lay, desiring that he should teach them at the end in benediction and consolation. Then was revealed to him the secret that had been hidden from him, and then was opened the door which had been shut to him. Our father Jacob turned therefore and blessed his sons. Every man according to his good did he bless him. And when the 12 tribes of Jacob were assembled and surrounded the golden bed whereon our father Jacob lay, they expected that he would make known to them in order of blessing and consolation, but they were hidden from him. Our father Jacob answered and said to them, From Abraham, my father's father, arose the profane Ishmael and all the sons of Keturah. And from Isaac, my father, arose the profane Esau, my brother. And I am afraid lest there should be among you a man whose heart is separated from his brethren, to go and worship before strange idols. The 12 tribes of Jacob answered all together and said, Hear us, Israel our father, the Lord our God is our God. And Jacob our father answered and said, May his great name be blessed forever and ever. That's the Genesis chapter 48 through 49 Targum version. And what is interesting about this is that the story told in this particular passage that Abraham had passed them on to Isaac, and that Isaac had secured them and given them to Jacob. That's not the story that we see revealed in all the ancient commentaries. It says that Rebekah actually secured them for Jacob, giving them to him, that he passed these items on to his son Joseph, and that the garments of power are the robe of many colors that Joseph came to be in possession, and that this is the item that was the vesture dipped in blood of which Messiah will return in Revelation 19 at the end of days. And so, very interesting story. We'll continue on because we're quickly running out of time. All right. Here's a passage confirming Joseph's reception. Joseph received two gifts from his father. The first was Shechem, the city that Jacob had defended with sword and bow against the depredations of the Amorite kings when they tried to take revenge upon his sons for the outrage committed there. And the second gift was the garments made by God for Adam and passed from hand to hand until they came into the possession of Jacob. Shechem was his reward because with his chastity he stemmed the tide of immorality that burst loose in Shechem first of all. Besides, he had a prior claim upon the city. Shechem, the son of Hamor, the master of the city, had given it to Dinah as a present. And the wife of Joseph, Asenath, being the daughter of Dinah, the city belonged to him by right. Adam's clothes Jacob had received from Esau. He had not taken them from his brother by force, but God had caused them to be given to him as a reward for his good deeds. They had belonged to Nimrod. Once, when the mighty hunter caught Esau in his preserves and forbade him to go on the chase, they agreed to determine by combat what their privileges were. Esau had taken counsel with Jacob, and he had advised him never to fight with Nimrod while he was clothed in Adam's garments. The two now wrestled with each other, and at the time Nimrod was not dressed in Adam's clothes. The end was that he was slain by Esau, and thus the garments worn by Adam fell into the hands of Esau, and from him they passed into Jacob's, and he bequeathed them to Joseph. Jacob also taught Joseph 3 signs whereby to distinguish the true Redeemer who should deliver Israel from the bondage of Egypt. He would proclaim the ineffable name, the appoint elders, and use the word pakod in addressing the people. That's from the legends of the Jews. Okay. Maybe I should just skip on to Moshe. I think I'll do that, actually. All right, and so what happened here? Once Joseph came into possession of these items, we know that he was made the vice regent under King Mechron, who was the Pharaoh during his time, and that he ruled for a very long time in establishing Egypt as a world dominating power, and that Pharaoh came to be very, very wealthy and very, very rich because of the dream that Joseph was able to interpret for Pharaoh. And that both of them, well, Pharaoh became very rich and very powerful. And Joseph also, under his leadership and rule, that and it could be that the garments of power also had something to do with his rise to power, which it seems that they do have link to rulership and to the favor, the dominion and the favor that the different kings receive in some kind of beneficent manner. And certainly this did occur to Joseph as well. And so by the time that Joseph had passed away, the Pharaoh's son, Melol, Melol, came to power. And he was against the Israelites. And he had taken counsel with his younger, just those that he had pointed. And they were completely against the Israelites succeeding in any manner. And when Joseph passed away, the royal armies, the Pharaoh's guards, they entered into Joseph's house and they ransacked everything, and they took specifically these items and put them into the royal treasury. And now the story turns from that of Joseph to Ruel, which again, those of you that know, Ruel is the name of Jethro, the real name of Jethro. And that Jethro came to be the father-in-law of Moses. But before that occurred, there was a time when the Egyptian peoples were plagued by boils and by disease. And that was because Pharaoh was killing the Hebrews, the Israelites, and they were preventing them from coupling. They were working them to death. They weren't even allowing the men to sleep with their wives or to live together with their wives, because they were trying to prevent them from having children and growing in population. But God had taken care of the children supernaturally and continued to multiply the Israelites. And so then they decided to throw all the boys, all the Hebrew boys that were born, into the waters of the Nile, whereby they would drown and then be carried down to what was the Reed Sea. And it would be at the Reed Sea that you would see the bodies of these children floating. And it was a reminder of the kind of abuse the Israelites were undergoing. And so what happened that led to Jethro fleeing, because he decided to leave. He was an advisor to Pharaoh, along with Job, who was of Esau's line, and Jannes and Jambres, who were the two children of Balaam. And they had become the advisors to Pharaoh as well. Well, the Jannes and Jambres gave Pharaoh a remedy for his boils. They told him that he should kill the innocent infants of the Hebrew children and bathe in their blood. And so he did exactly that. He would slaughter, drain their blood, and bathe and also wash in the blood of the innocents. And because of this, Jethro, who was already a believer in Yahweh or Yahuwah or Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, the Father, Yahweh, Jehovah, some, say. But anyways, he fled, and he was not going to have any part in the massacre of children or the judgment to slaughter the innocents. And unfortunately, Job, who was also one of the advisors for Pharaoh, because he was not outspoken or in protest of this cure that Janus and Jambres had come up with. Well, we know the story of Job, that he was targeted by Satan for having destroyed the high places where Satan in the form of Baal was being worshipped. And so that was one of the reasons why God allowed, when he was persecuted by Satan, that he had to undergo, and that he also had to endure the boils that the Egyptian people were exposed to as well. And so Jethro flees eastward to the land of Midian, and he becomes priest king over these people who were idol worshippers. They were pagan. And because he knows the Most High God, he doesn't want to lead them in the worship of idolatry. And walking around with the staff in his garden, it takes root. And he receives a prophecy that the one that could remove the staff in the future, that is able to remove the staff from its firmly rooted place in his garden, that person would be the one to not only lead the Israelites from the bondage and their servitude under the Egyptian Pharaoh, but that being blessed, he should desire his oldest daughter be given to him in marriage. And so this is exactly what occurs. Some 40 years later, in similarity to how the Israelites had to wander in the wilderness before being allowed to enter into the promised land, so was Moses. He was forced to wander in similarity all throughout the land in the wilderness until he encountered Zipporah at the well. The same well, as I made mention of, where Eliezer meets Rebekah and takes her back to be the wife for Isaac, and also where Jacob meets Rahel. At that same place, Moshe would meet Zipporah, and feeding and nourishing their flocks, they take him back home to their house and introduce him to their father. And unfortunately for Moses, he's then locked up for a period of time. But enduring this time and being sustained by Zipporah, he then is able to pull forth the rod from the ground and then takes Zipporah to be his wife. And then he later, when he is in the wilderness near Mount Sinai, where he would take the flocks, his father's sheep, his father-in-law's sheep, that he, during a rainstorm and being unable to start a fire himself, saw a burning bush upon the mountain, and when he went to go investigate, that's when he was tasked and granted commission to lead the Israelites away from their bondage. And that's what he did. And so I'll read the story. And I think we'll have to end it here. But I will pick it up. I can probably do 2 more shows on this topic. And it'll be perfect because that's exactly how much time we have till the coming conference, I believe. And then you'll be familiar with the story. And those of you that are attending the conference, I should have copies of the book. They will be rough. And I will be, I'm sure, adding more information later to it. But it's already 300 plus pages of information. So it's quite lengthy with regard to all of this material. And then there's so many other topics that are elaborated on in there that I will not even be covering in shows. So there will be a lot of interesting tidbits and passages and chapters that I won't be speaking on, available for those of you that do get it and do study it. All right. All right, it says this. One of the 7 maidens whom Moses saw at the well attracted his notice in particular on account of her modest demeanor, and he made her a proposal of marriage. But Zipporah repulsed him, saying, "My father has a tree in his garden with which he tests every man that expresses a desire to marry one of his daughters. And as soon as the suitor touches the tree, he is devoured by it." Moses, whence has he the tree? Zipporah, it is the rod that the Holy One, blessed be he, created in the twilight of the first Sabbath eve, and gave to Adam. He transmitted it to Enoch, and from him it descended to Noah, then to Shem and Abraham and Isaac, and finally to Jacob, who brought it with him to Egypt and gave it to his son Joseph. When Joseph died, the Egyptians pillaged his house, and the rod which was in their booty they brought to Pharaoh's palace. At that time, my father was one of the most prominent of the king's sacred scribes, and as such, he had the opportunity of seeing the rod. He felt a great desire to possess it, and he stole it, and he took it to his house. On this rod, the ineffable name is graven, and also the 10 plagues that God will cause to visit the Egyptians in a future day. For many years it lay in my father's house. One day he was walking in his garden carrying it, and he stuck it in the ground. And when he attempted to draw it out again, he found that it had sprouted and was putting forth blossoms. That is the rod with which he tries any that desire to marry his daughters. He insists that our suitors shall attempt to pull it out of the ground, but as soon as they touch it, it devours them. Having given him this account of her father's rod, Zipporah went home accompanied by her sisters, and Moses followed them. Jethro was not a little amazed to see his daughters return so soon from the watering hole, the watering troughs. As a rule, the chicanery they had to suffer from the shepherds detained them until late. No sooner had he heard their report about the wonder-working Egyptian than he exclaimed, "Mayhap he is the one of the descendants of Abraham from whom issued blessing for the whole world." He rebuked his daughters for not having invited the stranger that had done them so valuable a service to come into their house, and he ordered them to fetch him in the hope that he would take one of his daughters to wife. Moses had been standing without all this time and had allowed Jethro's daughters to describe him as an Egyptian without protesting and asserting his Hebrew birth. For this, God punished him by causing him to die outside of the promised land. Joseph, who had proclaimed in public that he was a Hebrew, found his last resting place in the land of the Hebrews. And Moses, who apparently had no objection to being considered an Egyptian, had to live and die outside of that land. Zipporah hastened forth to execute her father's wish, and no sooner had she ushered him in than Moses requested her hand in marriage. Jethro replied, "If thou canst bring me the rod in my garden, I will give her to thee." Moses went out, found the sapphire rod that God had bestowed upon Adam when he was driven forth from paradise, the rod that had reached Jethro after manifold vicissitudes, and which he had planted in the garden. Moses uprooted it and carried it to Jethro, who conceived the idea at once that he was the prophet in Israel concerning whom all the wise men of Egypt have foretold that he would destroy their land and its inhabitants. As soon as the thought struck him, he seized Moses and threw him into a pit in the expectation that he would meet with death there. And indeed, he would have perished if Zipporah had not devised a stratagem to save his life. She said to her father, "Would it were thy will to hearken unto thy counsel, my counsel. Thou hast no wife, but only 7 daughters. Dost thou desire my 6 sisters to preside over thy household? Then shall I go abroad with the sheep? If not, let my sisters tend the flocks, and I shall take care of the house." Her father said, "Thou hast spoken well. Thy 6 sisters shall go forth with the sheep, and thou shalt abide in the house and take care of it, and all that belongeth to me therein." Now Zipporah could provide Moses with all sorts of dainties as he lay in the pit, and she did it for the space of 7 years. At the expiration of this period, she said to her father, I recollect that once upon a time thou didst cast into yonder pit a man that had fetched thy rod from the garden for thee, and thou didst commit a great trespass thereby. If it seemeth well to thee, uncover the pit and look into it. If the man is dead, throw his corpse away, lest it fill the house with stench. But should he be alive, then from thou oughtest to be convinced that he is one of those who are wholly pious, else he had died of hunger. The reply of Jethro was, Thou hast spoken wisely. Dost thou remember his name? And Zipporah rejoined, I remembered he called himself Moses, the son of Amram. Jethro lost no time. He opened the pit and called out, Moses, Moses. Moses replied and said, Here am I. Jethro drew him up out of the pit, kissed him, and said, Blessed be God, who guarded thee for 7 years in the pit. I acknowledge that he slayeth and reviveth, that thou art one of the holy pies, that through thee God will destroy Egypt in time to come. Lead his people out of the land and drown Pharaoh and his whole army in the sea. Thereupon Jethro gave much money to Moses, and he bestowed his daughter Zipporah upon him as wife, giving her to him under the condition that the children born of the marriage in Jethro's house should be divided into 2 equal classes, the one to be Israelitish, the other Egyptian. When Zipporah bore him a son, Moses circumcised him and called him Gershon, as a memorial of the wonder of God had done for him. For although he lived in a strange land, the Lord had not refused him aid, even there. Zipporah nursed her first child for 2 years, and in the 3rd year she bore a second son. Remembering his compact with Jethro, Moses realized that his father-in-law would not permit him to circumcise this one too, and he determined to return to Egypt that he might have the opportunity of bringing up his second son as an Israelite. On the journey thither, Satan appeared to him in the guise of a serpent and swallowed Moses down to his extremities. Zipporah knew by this token that the thing had happened because her second son had not been circumcised, and she hastened to make good the omission. As soon as she sprinkled the blood of the circumcision on her husband's feet, a heavenly voice was heard to cry to the serpent, commanding him, Spew him out. And Moses came forth and stood upon his feet. Thus Zipporah saved Moses' life twice, first from the pit and then from the serpent. When Moses arrived in Egypt, he was approached by Dathan and Abiram, the leaders of the Israelites, and they spake, Comest thou hither to slay us, or dost thou purpose to do the same with us as thou didst with the Egyptian? This drove Moses straightway back to Midian, and there he remained 2 years more until God revealed himself at Horeb and said to him, Go and bring forth my children out of the land of Egypt. That's book 4 of the Legends of the Jews. We'll end it there, and tomorrow night, Rob Skiba will be joining me for the 12th installment of our chapter-by-chapter, verse-by-verse study of the Book of Enoch. Hope you guys and gals, ladies and gentlemen, that you enjoyed the show and that you find this story as intriguing as I. Be blessed all. Until next week. We may be doing a actual interview, but I'll let you know. And but I'll pick up. I've got 2 more shows on this series. And then I'll see you at the conference. Be blessed, everyone. Good night.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures. Everyday questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses?
Which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible.
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.